And he himself gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, and some pastors and teachers, for the equipping of the saints for the work of ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ, till we all come to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God.
Well, while people are filtering back in, let me tell you a story about a guy that I heard about. You may have heard about this before, but there was this guy. He was about 35 years old, and he had never been married because he was looking for the perfect wife, and he was extremely particular. His standards in every area were just incredibly high. 35 years old, never been married. He was on a business trip one day. He was flying, and he had actually boarded an airplane, and the airplane was in the process of boarding, and so he sat down in his seat there, just kind of minding his own business. All of a sudden, he looked up in the aisle, and there's this woman coming down the aisle, and I mean, she is just perfect. Everything he's ever thought that he would want in a wife, she is. And he just looks at her and thinks, oh my gosh, that's my perfect wife. I mean, that's her. I can't believe she's on this airplane. So sure enough, she comes and sits in the empty seat next to him, and he just can't believe it. He thinks, oh my gosh, it's happening. I'm 35 years old. I finally found the perfect wife. So he's nervous, and he sits there for a few minutes, and the plane takes off, and he's just, just fidgeting. And so finally he works up the nerve to start a conversation with her, and they start small talking, and he says, well, are you married? And she said, no, I'm not married. And he said, really? And, she was about his age, and he said, really, why not? And she said, well, I'm just real particular. I'm waiting for the perfect husband. And he said, really? Well, now, like what would the perfect husband be for you? And she said, well, you'll think I'm crazy if I tell you. He said, no, tell me. She said, well, it's kind of crazy. It's kind of a combination of traits, actually, I'm looking for in a man. And he said, well, like what? She said, well, you'll think I'm crazy when I tell you. And he said, no, tell me. She said, well, first of all, she said, I like American Indian men. She said, I think they're very virile, very handsome. And she said, but then also like Jewish men. I think they're very intelligent, very, very shrewd. And she said, but I'm a sucker from just a down-home country boy who works with his hands and drives a pickup. She said, so anyway, when I find that combination of traits in a man, I'll marry him. And she said, I don't think I got your name. And he said, my name is Geronimo Goldberg. But my friends call me Bubba. Okay. All right. Now then. Third law of marriage. That's where we are. Now, 4 foundational laws of marriage, without respect to people of who we are, God has set laws up that govern the institution of marriage. We can know that we can have a 100% chance of success in marriage if we follow God's laws. There's a law of priority. Marriage was created to be the first, most important priority in our life, with the exception of our relationship with Jesus Christ. The second law of marriage is that marriage is work. We have to cleave unto our spouse, which means to give great energy to our relationship throughout all the years of our marriage. When you start getting lazy, your marriage isn't going to work anymore. There's going to be resentment. But to the degree that you work at your marriage is to the same degree it's going to work for you. Those are the first 2 laws. The third law, and this is a profound law, it says in Genesis 2, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife. And it says, they two shall become one flesh. Now, the intimacy and the union of marriage is so profound that when the Bible tries to find a word to describe how profound it is, the only word that can be used is one. You two are going to become one. This is called the law of possession. The law of possession, simply stated, is your spouse is possessed. No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I was reading the wrong notes here. God designed marriage to be a co-owning and co-administrating of everything in our life. Anything that we will not surrender to the ownership of our spouse will create legitimate jealousy and destroy the relationship. They two shall become one. Well, the only way that 2 things can become one is if they totally surrender their own individual identity for the corporate identity. And this is anathema in the culture that we live in, where people are selfish and independent and don't like the interdependence and losing of themselves. But what God said in the beginning is these two now are going to become one. Now, I brought up the term earlier, legitimate jealousy, and I want to bring it up again, legitimate jealousy. Anything that you will not surrender to the ownership and administration of your spouse in marriage will create jealousy and resentment, and the longer it remains apart from them and unsurrendered, the more damage it will do. And again, it can be a job, it can be something that you own, it can be anything in your life that you're not willing to give into the marriage relationship. Now, by the way, I told you earlier that the marriage relationship mirrors our relationship with Jesus. Listen to what Jesus says now in Luke 14:33. He says, "So likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple." How do you become intimate with Jesus? Well, there's one way that you can become intimate with Jesus, and that is give Him everything you have. If you give Him everything you have, then you've become one with Jesus. But what if there is something that you won't give up for Jesus? What if Jesus came into your life tonight and He said, "You want to be my disciple?" And He said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you have to give everything up." And you said, "Well, Lord, I'd give everything up except my new car, or my new job, or my hobby, or I'd give you everything, Lord, except for that money I have in the bank," or whatever. You know, Jesus would say is, whatever you won't give up for me now is an idol. Whatever you won't give up for me, you're telling me that thing is more important than me. And when you come into marriage, and you're married, and there is something that you will not give up for your spouse and surrender to the ownership and administration of your spouse, to let them speak into it and administrate it, when you won't do that, whatever that is will create resentment and damage to the marriage relationship. Let me give you 3 specific ways now that we violate now this law of possession. Number 1 is dominance, and this is very, very common. Let me just ask a question just here real quick. By the way, dominance is disproportionate control of the marriage in those elements that are common to the marriage. When you have one spouse that dominates the marriage relationship, it always creates damage in the relationship. Now, it's very common for one spouse to be dominant. I was extremely dominant of our marriage relationship when we first got married. I tell you, it just destroyed our marriage. It destroyed the intimacy of our marriage relationship. But let me ask you a question just to show you now how common this is. How many of you, looking back into your family history, your mother and father, and if your mother and father are here, please don't answer this question. But how many of you now were raised in a home where one of your parents was clearly dominant? Would you raise your hands? Okay, now look at how many hands and look how quickly we identified that. Okay, now put your hands down. Now, how many of you would say that dominance in one of your parents was harmful to the family relationships and to your parents' marriage? Raise your hands if you would. Look at the same number of hands and how quickly they went up. Dominance is destructive. We know it. As children, when we're being raised and we're watching one parent dominate the other, we know it's wrong. But let me tell you what dominance is. Dominance is seizing control of the assets of the relationship. And those assets can be money, children, time, friends, interest, whatever those assets are. Dominance means I'm not going to share this with you. I'm controlling it, and you can come along for the ride. It always violates the law of possession. God said these two should become one. I want to remind you now, ladies and gentlemen, in Genesis chapter 2, where God created men and women, there was never a reference to authority. It never said there that Adam was Eve's boss or her lord or her whatever, and she was supposed to submit to him. I really believe the healthier your marriage gets, the less you'll talk about who's boss. In fact, if you talk in your marriage a lot about who's boss, you have a very unhealthy marriage. The best marriage relationship is where you're partners. God created marriage to be an equal partnership between two people who are absolutely and essentially the same in value in the sight of God. So dominance just ruins everything. Let me give you a dollhouse analogy. If you imagine a dollhouse for just a minute, we crank the lid of that dollhouse back. You're looking down into the rooms of the dollhouse. In a functional family, you look down and there are two big rooms. And it's mom and dad's room in that home. And they're both the same size. They're both big, by the way. Little bitty children don't have a room because they don't have any right to control the family. because they're little bitty. And as they get older, you give them a room, not a very big room, but as they get older, you give them more and more room. Their room never matches your size room because they're young and they're growing up. And at any point in time, when they're, when they grow up, and as children grow up, when they're healthy, they want a room the size of yours. That's when you walk them to the front door. Now then, but that's what happens. In healthy children, they get in high school, and they want to express themselves. That's a healthy thing when it's within the right spirit and the right parameters. But understand, a dysfunctional family, you look down into the roof of that dollhouse, and mom and dad don't have the same size room. In fact, one of them has a significantly larger room than the other. That's a dysfunctional family. If mom and dad don't have the same size room, there's something wrong with that relationship. And it's horrible if the children have a bigger room than one or both parents. That's how you can know that you're living in a dysfunctional family. And we know now that there are children that run a home, that they control the assets of a home. However they control it, they do. And so marriage is an equal partnership, and dominance now destroys it. Here's what dominance is. Dominance, first of all, is a lack of sharing of myself both internally and externally. I'm not going to share my ideas with you because mine are better than yours. I'm not going to share control because I'm going to control. I don't trust you. I don't trust your ideas. I'm not going to share the things outside or the things inside. I am going to dominate. There are two types of dominance. There is total dominance or segregated dominance. There is dominance where one person controls everything. There's other forms of dominance now where a wife may control the money and the children, and the husband may control the home and something else. And so, but typically you find one person is doing it. Most of it. And here's another interesting thing. It's equally as common for men and women. There are not more dominant men than dominant women, or more dominant women than dominant men. As many women now are dominant, or as dominant in a destructive way, as men are. Now, and some people would say, well, Jimmy, if it works, why mess with it? If one person is dominant and they make good decisions and the other person's fed and they're getting a paycheck, why mess with it? Well, let me just tell you why I mess with it. Number one is it's against God's design. Number two is it never works. It always is destructive. John Gottman at the University of Washington has studied marriage and divorce longer than anyone else. For 17 years, he's intensely studied the issue of marriage and why people divorce. He can predict divorce with a 93% accuracy. And he took couples, 130 newly married couples, and he took them from the point at which they got married. He was already tracking another group of happy, successful couples who he had been tracking for 13 years. But in addition to that group, he took 130 newly married couples and he taught them what was called active listening before they ever got married. Because they were trying to find out how well active listening would help a marriage and reduce the problems in a marriage. And active listening is like this. You say something, and when you finish saying something, I'll look at you and say, here's what I heard you saying. That's active listening. I repeat it back, what I heard you say, and then you say, no, that's not what I said, or yes, that's what I said. So he taught them active listening and tracked them now for 6 years into their relationship. At the end of the 6 years, he took the 130 newly married couples and he compared them with the 13-year study group that he already had going. Here's what he found out. Active listening doesn't work. It makes absolutely no difference in whether your relationship is successful or unsuccessful. But here's what he found. In both groups, the number one thing that determined how happy and successful that couple the couples were was shared control of the relationship. In every case where he found a couple, they shared control of the children, they shared control of the money, they shared control of the assets of the relationship and the relationship itself to the degree now that they shared control and allowed influence from their spouse. Healthy marriages and healthy spouses allow influence from the other person. Unhealthy spouses do not allow influence. Stop talking to me. It's none of your business. No, don't talk to me about that. No, just be quiet. And I don't want you talking to me. And they're trying to gain influence into an area, and you keep shoving them back. The number one quality John Gottman found of the couples who were successful was shared control of the relationship. So some of you now are here tonight and you have a dominant personality. I have a naturally dominant personality, a very choleric leader type of a personality. Let me tell you, there's nothing wrong with having a leader personality if it's baptized in the Holy Spirit. And Jesus says, or Galatians 5 says, that the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So it doesn't matter what your personality is. The Holy Spirit is a great equalizer of all personalities. But if you have a choleric personality and you're just very dominant, you'll seize control and you'll really think, we're better off with me being in control. And you're very wrong. You're destroying the relationship. And I was there and I did that. Another reason why some people dominate is because they grew up in a family where that happened. All the men were dominant. And my father was not dominant, but I can tell you, my grandfather and his brothers, I was really more influenced growing up by my grandfather. My grandfather never shaved himself, never wrote anything for himself, never dialed the telephone for himself. My grandmother served him and waited on him like a slave, hand and foot. And when I was growing up, I thought, that's nice. I like that. And I tried to make Karen do that. Literally, my grandfather, he would sit in his chair, and my grandmother would wait on him hand and foot. My father, when I was growing up, he'd just reach over and thump his coffee cup. My mother would go get him coffee. And I thought, that's phenomenal. I did that to Karen. You better be killing a fly there, pal. I'm not getting up. I'm telling you, when you are raised in a home where the father is dominant and you're a boy, you catch on to that. When the father's dominant and you're a girl, you either learn to live under it or you swear to yourself you'll never have it again and you marry someone you can dominate. Either way, you're jumping off both sides of the ditch there. And you're still not living the right way. If you're a little girl and you're growing up in a female-dominated home, you may think that's correct for women to dominate men. But if you're a little boy and you're growing up in a female-dominated home, you feel emasculated by your mother and you'll swear that no woman will ever dominate you again. I counseled a man this year who has never been successfully married, and he is my age, and it's because, he says immediately when you begin to talk to him, it's because of what he witnessed when he was growing up of his mother dominating his father. Dominance is devastating to a marriage relationship, and it's one of the ways that we violate the law of possession, that we share all things. Another way that we violate it is just being independent and selfish, not being willing to yield the things that we have into our marriage. And I'm going to say, like, this is my job, and my money, and my this. When you get married, you lose that word mine. It's all ours now. You have nothing of yourself. And let me just tell you how profound this is now. And you say, Jimmy, you're telling me that everything I have has to be surrendered to the control of the marriage? Yes, but let me tell you how bad it's going to get, folks. 1 Corinthians 7 says, when you get married, you lose authority of your own body. And there's women in here saying, oh no, it's bad enough already. The Bible says that when you get married, that your spouse has the right to your body to meet their sexual needs, and not for abuse, but for use. And it says in 1 Corinthians 7 that when you get married, the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Everything that you have when you get married, everything has to be co-owned and co-administrated. And let me tell you why Americans cannot succeed in marriage. It's because we're a selfish nation. We breed selfishness, and we hold selfishness as one of our highest virtues. Marriage is brutal on selfish people. God never designed marriage for a couple of selfish people. Marriage was designed for people who were sacrificial servants and who were willing to give everything they had into the marriage relationship. Here's another common problem now with this law of possession, and it's protecting assets for what you believe may be good reasons. Let me give you an example. And I know there are people, probably many people here tonight, from blended families. Now, blended families, a person gets married, and blended families means there's children. There are children from those previous marriages on one or both sides. Now, I have done a lot of counseling over the years with blended family couples, and the number one issue that comes up are the children. Now, let me give you an example of a counseling situation I had. This is very common. I had a couple. They were in for counseling. Her children had come with her from a previous marriage. This couple got along very well. The problem was with her son. Children typically are very loyal to their biological parents, and they very easily become adversarial to a new relationship that their husband or that their mother or father has with a new spouse. In this case, the mother got remarried, and the boy now became very adversarial with her new husband. That's why they were in for counseling. And they came in for counseling, and they sat down in my office, and they began to talk, and they were sitting there being affectionate, and they just said, the problem is her son. And I said, okay, well, tell me about it. And he says, well, he just makes my life miserable. He defies me. He does everything he can to just come between us and do this and this. And she, number one, she won't discipline him for that because she's afraid that he's already damaged because of the divorce that she went through. And number two, she won't let me have any right now to speak to him or to correct him in any way. Now, let me say this. In a remarried situation with blended families, it's always wise for the biological parent to be the disciplinarian. There's no doubt about that. Now, it's not healthy. It's not good for a new parent or a step parent to immediately begin to discipline a child. You have to earn the right to do that. But let me say this. When you are remarried and you come into a new marriage with those children have to become the property of your new spouse. They have to have the right to speak into the lives of those children. And if they don't, those children will divide the marriage. In this case, this woman felt as though she felt more loyalty to her child than she did her new husband, and her husband felt vulnerable. This couple divorced, ladies and gentlemen. They did not stay together. And in my office, they sat there, and he said, I can't take anymore. And she said, I cannot do anything to damage my son any further, and I'm not going to correct him, and I'm not going to let you correct him or whatever, because I'm already worried about him. And this guy left. And he said, I can't live in this situation. Well, let me say this. Every blended family, the family builds around the marriage, not the children. If there is no integrity to the marriage, there is no integrity to the family. And even though your feelings may be very, very accurate over the children and what they're going through, here's what you need to understand. You've got to trust the person that you're married to enough to trust them with your children. And if you don't trust them with your children, you shouldn't marry that person. The purpose of dating is to find out how good a person's character is. That's the purpose of dating and courting, is to find out the character and integrity of the person you're marrying. And when you get married, what you're saying is not just I like you and I'm attracted to you and I'm going to spend the rest of my life with you. When you get married, what you're saying is I trust me with you and everything I'm bringing with me. I believe that you have the integrity to raise my children or to spend my money or to do whatever. And if you get married but you have assets that you will not trust, especially in the area of children, it doesn't work. So in blended family situations, even though there are still biological parents and they are respected, this home has to be built around the marriage, and the children have to be surrendered to the co-ownership and control of your new spouse. Together now, not individually, but together to raise those kids. Here's another issue, prenuptial agreements. Now, I know some of you in here tonight maybe don't have a prenuptial agreement. Prenuptial agreements are normally with wealthy people. And I did this seminar, but they're becoming very common in our culture. A prenuptial agreement is saying, before we ever get married, I want you to know you're not going to get all this stuff. Okay. And so before we get married, to make sure that if anything happens, you don't get all my stuff, I want you to sign this document. Now, you say, well, what does that do? It's a death sentence. A prenuptial agreement is a death sentence. You violated the law of priority before you ever got married, or the law of possession before you ever got married. You said there's something I'm not going to give you, and it's money. Well, I did this seminar last year in another city, and there was a very wealthy man in the congregation, out in the audience, and I got finished speaking, and the minute that I was finished with this session, he was up in my face. He was an extremely wealthy man. And he was up in my face, and his wife was standing behind him. And he came up to me, and he said, so what you're saying is, there's a problem with my 70-page prenuptial agreement I had my wife sign. Now, I want to show you her face. She's standing behind his shoulder going, she was so happy she couldn't even stand it. And I said, sir, there's something wrong with the 70-page prenuptial agreement. He said, okay, I just want to make sure I heard you say that right. 70-page prenuptial agreement. I mean, I don't know how much money that guy had, but he must have had some. And he certainly didn't want her to get it. I don't know what happened to their relationship after that seminar, but I can tell you, it's wrong. And so all these things here, and what I said may not touch you, dominance, independence, protection, whatever it is, that you're doing, I can just let you know there is a law that says marriage is to be co-owned and co-administrated between the two of us. You ever break that law there, now I'm telling you, resentment will immediately set in, whatever it is. Here's truths about the law of possession. Number one, possession communicates value. If I'm willing to give you my money and my savings account and let you influence me concerning my work and my friends, I value you. When the Bible says that a man will leave his father and mother, if I'm willing to give up my father and mother for you, I'm saying you're more valuable than my mother and father. But if I'm saying to you, I will not give up my job for you, what I'm saying is you're not as important as my job. If I won't give up my friends for you, what I'm saying is you're not as important as my friends. If I won't give up fishing for you, you're not as important as the fish. And what does that say to another person? I mean, that's the way we hear it. It communicates value. Number two, possession conquers or creates jealousy. We're created in the image of God. He's a jealous God. And when I cannot influence an area of your life, it creates jealousy. But when I can, there is no jealousy in our relationship. Possession enhances or inhibits intimacy. How do people become intimate? They share everything. How do people become strangers in the same house? They don't share anything. They share a house and a checkbook and children with genes that are shared, but they don't share conversations, they don't share ideas, they don't share thoughts. They don't have any intimacy. Possession creates an atmosphere of interdependence, and that's the whole point. What makes a marriage is the interdependence. I am dependent upon you. And let me just say this. Here's how to establish the law of possession in your marriage. Number one, ask your spouse to pray with you and give you input concerning the issues of your life and the decisions of the family. Number two, never make an important decision without the input and agreement of your spouse. When we started our television program, God gave me some dreams about our television program. I just had a very clear vision about what we were supposed to do. And I went to Karen. Karen was a part of it, and I submitted it to her. I wasn't going to do it if she didn't agree. I won't do anything in my life significant. Let me tell you why. My relationship with Karen is more important than the issues. It's more important than a TV show. I mean, what happens if I am successful at work and come home to a miserable marriage? What do you have? It's more important than anything else. I'm not going to do anything significant without their input. And let me just tell you, in the counseling situations what we have of marriages that are on the rocks, what we find in those situations, one or both people will not be influenced by their spouse. And there's a tremendous amount of resentment there. Number three, communicate to your spouse your desire to be confronted and challenge concerning things that violate them or cause them concern. Let them know we're a team here. That's what makes a great marriage. We're a team. We're dependent upon one another. We're going to help each other make decisions. And Karen helps me make decisions. God has given her an entirely different input and instincts and things like that on different issues. And when I stop and listen to her, we always make better decisions together. And that's where the joy of marriage comes from, is getting there together. Number four, law of marriage. Number three is the law of possession. We have to share everything. Anything that we will not share will divide our relationship. Number four, the law of purity. It says, the last thing it says in Genesis 2:25, the man and his wife were both naked and they were unashamed. Okay? This cause a man shall leave his father and his mother, the law of priority, shall cleave unto his wife, the law of pursuit. And then it says, they two shall become one flesh, and the man and his wife were both naked and they were unashamed. Well, what does that mean? The word naked there is the word arom, and it just means to be exposed before one another. Adam and Eve, in Genesis chapter 2, before the fall in Genesis chapter 3, they were naked, and they weren't ashamed of it. I mean, they were completely exposed before one another. Now, let me tell you what the law of purity is. God designed marriage to operate in an atmosphere of purity. And in that atmosphere, we can expose ourselves to one another. As long as you don't sin against me. And when you do sin against me, you take responsibility for it. As long as you don't sin against me, I can share my ideas with you, I can share my feelings with you, I can share my dreams with you, and I can share my body with you. Now, it's interesting When sin came into the Garden of Eden, the first thing that Adam and Eve did was begin to hide their genitals with fig leaves. And let me tell you the significance of their genitals. It was their differences and their sensitivities. A man's body and a woman's body is generally the same except for our genitals. And our genitals are different, and they're the most sensitive areas of our body. Let me say this. When you are walking in purity in your relationship and you're careful how you treat your spouse, you'll be able to deal with your differences and your sensitivities. But when you begin to speak and act in an insensitive or immoral manner to one another, you will cover yourselves from each other, and you will no longer be able to share. When Karen and I got married, when we first met, we talked all the time. We'd stay up till 2 or 3 in the morning on the telephone talking. And we talked and talked and talked. But what happened is, I had a mouth on me. And I damaged Karen with my mouth. Whenever I got angry at her, I would punish her through the things that I was saying to her. And what I noticed when we got married was she didn't talk to me anymore. Is that we just didn't have those kind of conversations anymore. In fact, what I noticed is every year of our marriage that went by, I knew her less and less and less. See, now, what I didn't know is she was talking to her friends. She was telling her friends what she wasn't telling me. See, she could expose herself to other people. And see, this is why most murders occur in the bedroom. The greatest sensitivities of our life are exposed in marriage. And when I expose to you my heart of hearts, in that area of me that is the most sensitive, of all the people in the world, you can damage me the most if you're married to me. And so God designed marriage to where Adam and Eve could walk through the Garden of Eden completely exposed, sharing any thought, sharing any emotion, without any fear or shame whatsoever. Sharing their bodies until the fall in Genesis 3. And by the way, in the fall in Genesis 3, when they sinned against God, that's when Adam turned and he blamed the whole thing on Eve. God came to him and he says, "What is this that you've done?" And he said, "It's that woman that you gave me." And that's been the theme song ever since. And Eve took that glorious body that God had given her, and she didn't show it to him again. She put those fig leaves on. I don't know, I'm sure she took them off again at some point, but not the way she had before, because she didn't trust him anymore. See, Karen and I first met, and I was careful. I told you before, everything I said was so careful when we first started dating. I was so sensitive when I drove. Every little bump, "Are you okay?" And then later on, she would complain, "Jimmy, stop taking those bumps." And seriously, I've said this before many times when I took bumps and she complained. And I said, "These shocks can take it." The point isn't the shocks. The point is a human being. But in my mind, it was like, these shocks can handle it, honey. This car was designed for performance. This is a 1964 Dynamic 88 Oldsmobile. And she'd just sit there and look at me and say, "You don't care about me. You drive any way you want to. You talk any way you want to. You're insensitive. You're selfish. You're dominant. You're hurtful." And what she began to do is just layer after layer after layer of fig leaves that went on her. And I didn't know my own wife. After 5 years of marriage, we did not have any deep discussions. And I would ask her questions about this or that or this or that. And she would give me this little sort of, "Well, whatever." But I knew something was wrong, and I kept prying into it. So, "Well, what's wrong?" "Well, nothing." Well, the reason that she wasn't going to uncover herself to me was because I had so deeply damaged her already. See, you can only expose yourself in an atmosphere of purity. And when there is impurity, verbal abuse, sarcasm, hatefulness, selfishness, anything like that comes into the marriage relationship, and you won't take responsibility for it, what happens is it destroys the atmosphere that marriage works in. God designed marriage in a pure atmosphere where they could expose anything. Now see, what happened was we were married for 5 years. We came to the brink of divorce. And I went in and repented to Karen. By the way, I gave up golf for several years. I told you earlier that golf almost destroyed our marriage. On the night that I told Karen to leave the house, we'd had a horrible fight. She had confronted me on probably playing golf or something, and I unloaded on her. And she went into the bedroom crying, and I sat in the living room, and I knew that we were about to split up. And I said, "God, help." And it was like scales fell from my eyes. It literally was like that. It was like something dropped off of me, and for the first time in my life, I really did understand what a jerk I really was. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you, I was a jerk. I was a selfish idiot. And I had so abused Karen. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. And I woke up, finally, and I realized what I had done. I had never said I was sorry in 5 years of marriage and 3 years of dating. Never, not one time. Anytime we had a problem, it was her problem, and I shoved it down her throat. Anytime we got in a fight, I became a prosecuting attorney, and I won. And I would go after her until finally she would accept responsibility for what she hadn't done. And on that night that God pierced my heart and those scales fell from my eyes, I walked in the bedroom and I said to Karen, I'm sorry. And that got her attention. And she looked at me. She said, what? And I said, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. I'm wrong for the way that I've ignored you, and I'm going to stop playing golf. I'm wrong for the way that I've talked to you and beat you down. I'm just wrong for the way that I've treated you. And we were out of love. Some of you here tonight may be here and you just say, well, we're out of love. We were just plumb out of love. We didn't have any emotions left for one another. And in fact, we did not have good feelings about one another at that point in time. And I came in and I told her I was sorry. And I said, Karen, I'm gonna prove it to you. I'm going to change. And I did. I stopped playing golf. I started taking responsibility for my behavior. Let me tell you what happened in our relationship. First of all, we fell back into love. See, one of the deceptions the devil will tell you is, if you're out of love, you can't go back into love. Oh, yeah, you can too. In fact, when you go back into it, it's better than it's ever been before. You will fall back in love if you do what you did at the very beginning. And in the very beginning, you prioritized each other, you worked at it, you shared everything, and you were careful in the way that you behaved. When you did something wrong, you took responsibility for it. And here's what happened. Every day after that, I was trying my very, very best to change. And I was changing. And really and truly, I got to where I could say I was sorry. Rather than not saying I was saying I was sorry about every 5 minutes. Literally. Because I did so many things wrong. And I just kept saying, Karen, I'm sorry. And she kept saying, that's fine. She was very forgiving, that's fine. And here's what happened. Every time I took responsibility for my behavior and said I was sorry, a fig leaf fell off. And it fell off. It was like peeling an onion. Watching Karen get mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and physically naked again in our marriage was a miracle. As I began to change, when I was an idiot, and I was selfish, and I was dominant, she covered every difference and every sensitivity, and I did not know my own wife. I was living with a stranger, and I didn't even know it. She couldn't talk to me because I was so insensitive to her and would not take responsibility for my problems. But when I humbled myself and I began taking responsibility for my issues, and I was careful again, and I created a pure atmosphere for her to relate to me in, she began to drop off this fig leaf after fig leaf, and she began to share thoughts with me, and I would say, how long have you been thinking that? And she would say, well, 5 years. Well, why didn't you say anything? And I said, well, never mind, I know. She began to be sexually responsive. And for 5 years, I'd come home from working and playing golf and being an idiot. And I just expected sparks in the bed, and there were no sparks. She was always faithful to meet my sexual needs, but I'm just telling you, something was missing. But when I started taking responsibility for my behavior, the sister got naked. And she's been naked ever since. But, so people wonder, I'm not looking over there. I'm not looking over there. Well, don't you either. I'm dead, I know it. Karen, I'm sorry. But, people get married and they don't understand why their spouse won't talk to them. And a wife comes in to a counseling situation and says, well, he just won't talk. I don't understand why he won't talk. Well, sometimes it's because he's been violated. And he's confronted her. And she won't take responsibility for actions, and he's just shut off. God created marriage to be the place where we're most mentally naked. I can share any thought with you and feel safe. Any thought. And it may be a dumb thought. But you're my safe place. Where we can share our emotions. I feel this, I feel this, I feel this. I feel this, I feel this. And even if it's a dumb feeling, you're my safe place. I can share my spirit with you, my dreams, my hopes, what God has said, what I want God to say, my vulnerabilities, my weaknesses. And you're my safe place. And I can expose my body. Imperfect. Overweight. Getting older. No more details. And you're my safe place. The law of purity. The man and his wife were both naked and not ashamed. Isn't God smart? God came and He created a man and a woman. And He created laws to protect the integrity of that relationship and to make sure that they could love each other more every single year. And nothing could violate that happiness and that security if they would honor His laws. The law of priority, the law of pursuit, the law of possession, and the law of purity. Laws, not principles, laws. Every generation, every person, without regard to who you are or where you are, or how smart you are or pretty you are, or how rich you are or how good you are. These laws, if you keep these laws, you'll be blessed. If you violate these laws, you'll be punished. Not because God doesn't love you and doesn't want you to have a happy marriage, but because you've ignored eternal laws that God has set forth.